Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. The moment those susurrations slithered from the supposedly vacant 37th floor, I understood. My quiet existence as Elias Thorne, nocturnal custodian of Zenith Global Solutions, had fractured. My unremarkable life, polishing the veneer of corporate respectability, was about to become an unwilling spectator to something deeply malignant. What bled into the sterile silence that night would irrevocably alter my trajectory, catapulting me into currents of peril I hadn't dreamed existed beyond the pages of the manuscript I chipped away at during the graveyard shift. 3 years I'd traced the same paths through Zenith's echoing halls, a ghost with a mop, content in the predictable rhythm. Until that Tuesday, I was navigating the vast lunar landscape of polished terrazzo on the 37th, the buffer humming its monotonous song when the sound pricked the silence, voices, subdued, tight with urgency, leaking from the executive sanctum, the boardroom. Illusions of the tired mind, perhaps? This level, this entire towering monolith, save for skeletal security and us, the cleaners, was meant to be dormant. Yet curiosity, that treacherous cat, clawed at my caution. I drifted closer, the rhythmic thump in my ribs threatening to betray me, a frantic drum against the stillness. The heavy oak door stood carelessly ajar, a sliver of darkness inviting and forbidding. The words sharpened. Arrival confirmed for tomorrow night. A voice like crushed gravel resonated. All elements must align. And the federal interest countered another, higher strung taut with anxiety. Their inquiries have become pointed. They are being managed, the first voice stated, the gravel hardening into flint. Assets are positioned. They pose no consequence. A serpent of dread coiled in my gut. This wasn't some clandestine corporate strategy session. It smelled of illegality, of teeth bared in the shadows. Perhaps I shifted, a shoe squeaked, a breath hitched too loud, the dialogue snapped shut. Silence descended, thick and watchful. Then, the scrape of chairs on expensive carpet. What was that? The reedy voice quavered. Investigate, the deeper tone commanded, sharp as a blade. Panic, cold, and electric seized me. The corridor stretched before me, a polished, illuminated vulnerability. No alcove, no refuge. Blindly, I lunged for a nearby utility closet, a cramped space smelling of ammonia and old rags, pulling the door almost shut just as measured footfalls approached. Through the hairline crack, a silhouette materialized, a man sculpted by tailoring, his gaze sweeping the hallway like a searchlight. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate prisoner, an eternity condensed into seconds before he pivoted, returning to the boardroom's dim glow. Nothing, I strained to hear him report. Settling noises, perhaps. I remained entombed in the closet, breath held captive as the discussion resumed. Fragments pierced the wood, talk of consignments, disbursements, of neutralizing obstructions. It was pulp fiction made flesh, unfolding mere feet away, and I, the janitor, was trapped within its pages. Time stretched, distorted, until finally the muffled sounds of departure reached me. Chairs pushed back, footsteps receding, the distant, conclusive chime of an elevator. Only then did I dare to push the door open, emerging into the sterile silence, trembling. My thoughts scattered like dropped ball bearings. The authorities? But the gravel voice had hinted at tendrils reaching into law enforcement. Revealing myself could be signing my own death warrant. I completed my duties in a fog of hyper-awareness, each creak and hum amplified into a potential threat. Convinced shadowy figures watched from every darkened office. When I finally punched out into the gray pre-dawn at 6 a.m., a fragile resolve had formed. I needed undeniable proof. The following night felt different, charged with a hidden current. Tucked into my work shirt pocket, nestled against my skin, was a miniature voice recorder, a desperate gamble. If I could capture their poison, perhaps the police would be forced to listen. Floor after floor, I pushed my cart, ears straining against the building's ambient sighs. Hours bled together. Doubt began to gnaw. Had stress conjured phantoms from late-night exhaustion? Then, near 2 a.m, the sound returned. Voices, again from the 37th floor boardroom. My pulse leaped, a frantic bird against my ribs. Recorder activated, I crept near. More participants this time, a low chorus of conspiracy. At least 5 distinct timbres discussing the imminent arrival, the one scheduled for tonight. Mention of a warehouse near the wharves, a precise hour, 3:30 a.m. I let the device drink in their words for as long as my nerve held, then melted back into the shadowed hallway. My hands shook so violently the mop handle vibrated. I possessed it now, tangible evidence of the rot infesting Zenith Global Solutions from its highest echelons. Terror, sharper and more immediate, replaced the dread. Discovery now meant extinction. I had to reach the authorities immediately. Abandoning my route, I descended towards the ground floor, aiming to vanish into the nascent city dawn and find the nearest precinct. But as the elevator doors slid open onto the cavernous lobby, my blood turned to ice. Waiting, positioned like sentinels, were 2 figures from the previous night's clandestine gathering, and their eyes locked onto mine. Well now, one purred, the gravelly voice instantly recognizable, chillingly intimate. Working rather late, aren't we, custodian? My throat constricted. Just finishing up, sir. A smile played on his lips, devoid of warmth, predatory. Curious, I thought I glimpsed you near the executive suites earlier. Unusual territory for your rounds, wouldn't you say? They knew, by some unseen mechanism, they knew I'd trespassed on their secrets. Perhaps you should accompany us, the other man interjected, his hand reaching, closing the distance. Primal instinct detonated within me. I thrust the heavy cleaning cart forward, a clumsy battering ram. They stumbled, momentarily disrupted. In that sliver of chaos, I bolted, bursting through the revolving doors into the cool, damp embrace of the night. Shouts erupted behind me, the slap of expensive shoes on pavement gaining ground. The streets offered little sanctuary, skeletal traffic, a few stray souls navigating the city's nocturnal veins. I plunged into alleys slick with grime, scrambled over chain-link fences, fueled by sheer, unadulterated fear. How long I ran, I cannot say. My lungs burned, legs turned to stone, yet the terror propelled me onward. Then, a beacon in the encroaching dawn, the blue glow of a police station sign. I stumbled through the entrance, air tearing at my throat. The desk sergeant, startled from his late-night torpor, looked up sharply. "Help," I gasped, leaning on the counter. After me, Zenith Global, evidence. The subsequent hours dissolved into a surreal haze. Statements given, the small recorder surrendered, its contents spilling the toxic secrets. More officers materialized, detectives with weary eyes and sharp questions, making me retrace the narrative, again and again. As the first rays of sun angled through the station's grimy windows, casting long, accusatory shadows, one of the lead detectives approached. His expression was somber. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice low, "your courage. It's remarkable. This information you've brought us, it confirms suspicions, but the scope is far greater than anticipated. We'll need to arrange protective custody." The weight of my new reality settled upon me. I hadn't just stumbled upon petty corruption. I'd peeled back the skin on a monstrous enterprise, and my ordinary life was forfeit. The months that followed were a disorienting montage of anonymous motel rooms, guarded transports, hushed courtroom testimonies, and the constant gnawing necessity of looking over my shoulder. The Zenith Global Solutions case detonated in the media, a sprawling network implicated in everything from industrial-scale money laundering to the trafficking of human lives. My recording, my testimony, became the linchpin that brought much of the structure crashing down. Yet key figures, including the man with the voice like crushed gravel, evaporated into the ether. Even now, years removed, relocated under a different name, adrift in a new city on the opposite coast, sleep is often fractured by the phantom sound of footsteps approaching my door. The unease lingers, a permanent shadow. I replay that moment often, the decision to follow the whispers instead of retreating into ignorance. Regret flickers sometimes, a longing for the simple anonymity of polishing floors and nurturing literary dreams. But then I recall the lives potentially salvaged, the network disrupted, the sliver of justice delivered to unseen victims. Despite the cost, the choice resonates with a hard-won certainty. So should you ever find yourself alone in the echoing quiet of a late hour and hear that which is meant to remain unheard, remember Elias Thorne. Understand that sometimes the most vital cleansing isn't achieved with disinfectant and cloth, but with the audacity to drag filth into the light. Only be warned, stepping across that threshold means leaving blissful ignorance behind forever. The truth, I discovered, is a formidable, perilous force. Yet ultimately, it's the only weapon against the darkness, that festers within gleaming towers and behind the locked doors of power. Midnight was settling its dust when the first impact broke the pool's silence. Not the whisper of a leak, no furtive drip. This was a percussive blow, solid and sharp, as if ballast had been heaved into the deep end. My heart gave a violent kick. A band tightened around my lungs. The club lay dormant, locked tight. I was its sole occupant, the keeper of its nocturnal hush. Flashlight beams slicing the gloom, I swept the perimeter of the pool enclosure. Nothing. The water lay flat, obsidian under the vaulted roof, undisturbed. That night marked a shift, a subtle fissure in the bedrock of my routine. For ages, I've been the night shadow of this athletic club, Elias, weathered into the grain of the old edifice, its custodian when the daytime clamor bled away. It holds a gymnasium, a warren of locker rooms, and this covered pool tucked away at the back. By day, it echoes with exertion, the rhythmic slap of swimmers, the thud of weights, the squeak of sneakers on polished wood. But come 9, 10 o'clock, the human tide recedes, leaving me in the quiet ebb, tasked only with securing the doors and silencing the machines. The solitude was usually a balm, a welcome emptiness. My nightly circuit never varied, a ritual etched in habit. Locker rooms first, extinguishing lights, checking shower heads for errant drips, then a passage through the cavernous gym, confirming its vacancy. Lastly, the pool pavilion. High ceilings and swallowed sound, vast windows drank the meager street lamp glow, casting spectral shimmers onto the water's surface. Ordinarily, a tranquil space, cool, smelling faintly, predictably, of chlorine. A scent I barely registered, relegated to background noise, until the aqueous disturbances began. At first, I rationalized the phantom splashes, hallucinations born of fatigue, tricks of an aging structure perhaps, a grumbling pipe, the filter system's nocturnal sighs. Yet each frantic pilgrimage to the water's edge revealed only perfect stillness. No ripples marred the dark mirror. No swimmer cleaves the depths. Reason began to feel thin, unreliable. I'd strain my hearing into the void, waiting, breath held captive in my chest. Sometimes, drawing near, the chlorine tank seemed to intensify, biting the air with unusual sharpness. But I reasoned it away. Enclosed space, poor ventilation, surely. Then came the night the sound escalated beyond ignoring. A furious churning erupted from the water, a violence that sent me scrambling for the main light switch panel. As the overhead fluorescence flickered, stuttering awake in the seconds-long delay, I heard it, the unmistakable plunge of a dive, heavy and deep. Adrenaline surged, a cold fire coiling in my legs. Surely this time, I'd see a figure surfacing, gasping, or at least a head breaking the water, sleek and dark. The lights flared fully, bathing the tiles and water in stark, unwavering white. Vacant, utterly profoundly calm. My stomach plummeted. Tremors took my hands as the flashlight beam danced, a frantic insect seeking any anomaly, any sign of intrusion. Doors locked solid, bolted tight. The security feed became my next resort, a desperate appeal to objective reality. Huddled in the cramped office near the entrance, I spooled back the digital recording. There I was on screen, a lone figure etched in grainy monochrome by the poolside. The water, Yes, it did stir. Subtle undulations spread outwards from the center, visible even in the low resolution. But no one caused them. No shadow detached itself from the others, no spectral form, nothing human or otherwise discernible within the frame. A system glitch? An unfortunate camera angle obscuring the truth? The uncertainty left a metallic taste in my mouth, my palms slick with anxious sweat. From that night forward, the pool area became charged territory, a zone of palpable tension. I learned to approach it tentatively, my light probing ahead like a blind man's cane. The chlorine smell grew bolder, becoming a presence itself, acrid, invasive, sometimes making my eyes water. Some nights offered only profound silence, amplifying the hum of the building's hidden machinery. Others brought faint lapping against the tiles, the soft slosh of displaced water, always ceasing the instant I drew too close. I tried mentioning it once to Len, one of the daytime maintenance crew. He chuckled, waved a dismissive hand. "Old buildings groan, Elias," he'd said, offering plausible culprits. The water heater kicking in, the ventilation system settling. His easy dismissal didn't settle the disquiet churning within me. That pool, late at night, when the world outside slept, felt different. Every creak of the building, every distant rumble, became suspect. One evening, driven by a need for confrontation, I resolved to wait it out. After completing the lockup, I returned to the pool area and settled onto a hard plastic chair positioned near the water's edge. I kept the main lights off, relying solely on my flashlight's narrow beam to pierce the dark. The pool was an inky rectangle, its surface reflecting nothing clearly, swallowing the feeble light. Minutes stretched, marked only by the sound of my own measured respiration. Then, the familiar thickening of the air, the chlorine pressing against my sinuses, making my eyes burn. A low swish followed, soft but distinct, like an arm scything languidly through the water nearby. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I swung the light towards the center of the pool. A faint ripple disturbed the surface, a fleeting tremor propagating outwards. It was undeniable. I shot to my feet, muscles taut, adrenaline singing in my veins, stepping closer to the edge. The ripple vanished as if it had never been. Stillness reclaimed the water. I waited, poised, every nerve alight. Nothing more occurred. Sleep offered little refuge that night, the image of that subtle, inexplicable wave replaying behind my closed eyelids. I woke near dawn, slick with sweat, the question echoing, was something in there? Some complex malfunction in the subterranean machinery, some unseen blockage or pressure fluctuation. Daytime checks revealed nothing amiss. Water chemistry, perfect. Filters, pristine. Pumps, humming contentedly. Maintenance logs, immaculate. A week crawled by, punctuated by sporadic noises. A soft stir here, a distant splash there. Some nights were utterly quiet, amplifying the unease. Then came a night that fractured the pattern again. I was finishing my rounds, the gym silent as a tomb, the locker rooms steeped in shadow. I walked towards the pool area last, the final checkpoint. The chlorine stench hit me earlier than usual, sharp enough to make me cough, a chemical warning. Inside, my flashlight beam swept across the usual placid surface. Nothing. Suddenly, A loud, violent splash erupted right behind me. So close, so startlingly immediate, it shocked me into dropping my keys. They clattered and skittered across the unforgiving tiles. I spun around, light stabbing wildly into the empty air. My skin prickled with 1,000 tiny needles. Nobody. There was nobody there. But the sound had been real, visceral. Water still trickled down the poolside coping near the corner where the sound had originated. Ripples radiated outwards, concentric circles disrupting the dark glass. My pulse roared in my ears, a frantic surf. Drawn by an invisible current, I approached that corner. The chlorine smell intensified, becoming almost suffocating, burning my throat. I crouched down, peering intently into the depths, trying to discern some hidden device, some submerged anomaly. Clear water, shadowed tile, nothing. Tentatively, I tapped the surface with the flashlight's lens. The water felt unnaturally cold. The ripples subsided, smoothing themselves out. Stillness returned. I flicked on the overhead lights, stood up, and scanned every inch of the enclosure with painstaking care. Empty. My breathing was shallow, rapid. My hands shook uncontrollably. Later, reviewing the camera footage yielded the same maddening ambiguity. The water clearly moved. I was right there, reacting. Yet the space around me remained stubbornly vacant. I finally cornered the club manager, Mr. Davies, the next day. He listened with half an ear, his attention clearly elsewhere, nodding absently as I recounted the events. He promised vaguely to have the systems checked again. I watched him later, performing perfunctory tests on the water, fiddling with the pump controls. All clear, seems fine, he pronounced with a dismissive shrug. Just keep an eye on it, Elias. His casual indifference felt like a physical weight, amplifying my isolation, my gnawing self-doubt. Now, the final walk to the pool is a nightly ordeal, a passage through mounting dread. The tension coils in my stomach the moment I turn down that last corridor. Sometimes, a chilling cold clings only to that specific area, a localized drop in temperature unrelated to the building's ambient climate, raising gooseflesh on my arms despite my jacket. The chlorine assault is constant, a sharp, stinging presence that makes my eyes water from the fumes or perhaps from sheer nervous strain. A single, echoing drip, a soft, furtive stir in the depths. Sometimes nothing at all, a silence that feels heavier, more watchful than any sound. Then there are nights like the one recently, where a distinct sound, like a hand slapping the water's surface, sharp, sudden, near, broke the quiet. My voice, when I forced out a trembling hello, sounded thin and alien, swallowed by the vast, echoing space above the water. No reply came, only the low, indifferent thrum of the ventilation system and the frantic counterpoint of my own pulse in my ears. Closer inspection revealed nothing but my own distorted reflection trembling on the surface, looking back with wide, uncertain eyes. I never linger anymore. Locking the final door, hurrying to the perceived safety of my car, the feeling of being watched follows me out into the night. A phantom passenger glimpsed in the rearview mirror at lonely intersections. I tell myself it's pipes, it's air pressure shifts, it's my own frayed nerves painting specters onto the canvas of solitude. But a deeper, More primal instinct insists this is directed, personal, focused. I keep the job. The rhythm of routine and the necessity of bills demand it. But each night, stepping into that chlorine-heavy air, feeling that inexplicable chill seep into my bones, hearing those furtive, impossible sounds, I know with a chilling certainty that I am not truly alone. Something waits in the water, silent, attentive, unseen, and I wonder, with a tremor that has become a permanent resident beneath my skin, when the ripples will finally resolve into a form I can see rising from the aqueous dark that holds me in its unwavering gaze. A dissonance settled over the lake house by the second week of my residency. Not mere unease, but a palpable disturbance manifested in the fracturing of wood deep in the night, a brittle percussion suggesting methodical steps circling my isolated domain. Initially, denial offered flimsy shields, wind perhaps, or some nocturnal fauna. Yet the sound defied natural rhythms. It possessed a deliberate cadence, crunch, silence, crunch, silence. Tracing the very edge of the yard, my heart would sledgehammer against my ribs. Bolt upright in bed, chest constricting, I'd fixate on the black void of the bedroom window, paralysis rooting me there. Venture into that encompassing darkness, unthinkable. Investigation could wait for the dawn, I reasoned, though morning brought no relief, only a lingering residue of tension, a film of apprehension coating the daylight hours. This retreat was chosen for its profound seclusion, a sanctuary intended for focused creation, unburdened by interruption. The house, perched on the lip of a placid lake, embraced on three sides by a dense, imposing forest. Neighbors were non-existent, a feature I'd craved, and for one pristine week, productivity flourished alongside tranquility. Early awakenings, the ritual of coffee, the sibilant whisper of wind through pines, these were my only companions. No rumble of engines, no human voices, just the elemental trinity of self, water, and woods. Perfect peace, I'd thought, a fragile illusion swiftly shattered. The third day unveiled peculiar hieroglyphs etched in the soil near the house's flank. Not footprints, but arrangements, clusters of twigs and fallen branches meticulously swept into shallow curves. Each cluster echoed the same rudimentary arc, less decorative than directional. A visceral chill traced my spine as I discerned their collective form, a rough track snaking from the forest's shadowed maw directly toward my dwelling. Crouching, I brushed a warped twig. It snapped with a dry crack that resonated unnervingly. My mouth went arid. Who or what would engage in such nocturnal rearrangements out here? I forced the unease down, swept the brittle arrangements away, casting them deeper among the trees. Days later, however, new configurations materialized in the identical spot. Smaller this time, yet retaining the signature curve, like the ghost of footsteps pacing a loop, though no distinct impression marred the earth. Just the unmistakable disturbance. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. A faint vertigo swam in my head. Overreaction, surely. Wind patterns. Eccentric eddies. I clung to that rationale and retreated indoors. Sleep became elusive that night, haunted by visions of those earthen spirals. Around the stroke of midnight, The crunching returned, closer now, just beyond the low fence line. Slow, heavy footfalls on leaf litter and desiccated sticks. Flashlight clutched like a talisman, I remained captive within the walls, the front door a formidable barrier I dared not breach. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity in the hallway, wrestling with the impulse to see, battling a gut-tightening dread, my own respiration loud in the stillness. Finally, inching toward the living room window, I risked a sliver of vision through the blinds. Only impenetrable darkness met my gaze. Then, a protracted howl ripped through the night air, emanating from the woods. It wasn't wolf or coyote. Childhood years had attuned my ear to wild calls. This possessed an alien pitch, a wavering ululation that raised the hairs on my nape. My knees threatened to buckle. I recoiled from the window. Morning found me seeking solace by the lake's edge, the water a mirror of glassy calm. I stood absorbing the gentle lapping against the shore when movement flickered at the periphery of my vision. To my left, near a dense cluster of reeds 60 feet distant, a tall shape stood utterly still. It appeared draped in something resembling pond scum or river moss, arms hanging unnaturally low, legs elongated beyond human proportion. I froze, transfixed. A tingling sensation crawled across my scalp, my chest cinched tight. I blinked. A desperate reflex and the figure vanished. Only concentric ripples disturbed the water's surface where it had stood. Sweat beaded on my brow. Scrambling to the spot, heart hammering, I found nothing but swaying reeds. Except for the footprints. Pressed into the muddy bank were impressions, large and elongated, yet lacking the distinct morphology of feet. Smooth ovals, devoid of toes. My pulse roared in my ears. Forcing myself to crouch, I examined them. They led away from the water, disappearing into the tangled undergrowth. A rank odor permeated the air. Decaying vegetation and stagnant water mingled. I followed the impressions until the dense woods swallowed the trail just a few yards in. That evening, ensconced in the living room's artificial brightness, concentration proved impossible. The footprints dominated my thoughts. An old film played unwatched, each exterior noise, a rustle, a creak, prompting me to pause, listen intently. Then, near midnight, a flicker of motion registered at the corner of my eye by the side window. I leaped up, my heart vaulting into my throat. Approaching cautiously, I peered out into the blackness. Nothing visible, but the pane bore a faint, greasy smudge, as if something damp had pressed against it. My hand trembled uncontrollably. I checked the lock, then compulsively toured the house, verifying every door, every window latch. Secure, yet the feeling of exposure, of vulnerability, remained acute. The subsequent days passed without direct confrontation, but each dawn revealed fresh evidence of nocturnal visitation. Leaves scattered in inexplicable patterns, more twig arcs materializing at the property line. Some nights brought the return of that bizarre, unsettling howl. Others featured faint, rhythmic clicking sounds from the woods, like stones being tapped together. The lakeside silhouette remained unseen in daylight, though fleeting glimpses of movement deep within the trees teased my peripheral vision. I began leaving every light ablaze all night, indoors and out, installing powerful motion sensor floodlights in the backyard. Surely the sudden glare would deter whatever lurked there? The following night, however, I awoke to the rhythmic click on, click off of the floodlight, cycling relentlessly. Pulling on a jacket over my sleep clothes, I crept to the back door, easing it open a fraction. The floodlight snapped on, bathing the yard in stark white illumination, revealing the stark tree line. Then, darkness plunged back. 30 seconds ticked by. Light flooded the yard again, empty. Every nerve strained, listening, a dull throbbing starting behind my eyes. Cold air bit my face as I waited, breath shallow. Hesitantly, I stepped onto the porch. The sensor tripped once more, and in that stark, sudden light near the fence's edge, I saw it. The tall figure draped in its mossy integument, motionless, facing me. No discernible eyes, just the suggestion of an elongated head, perhaps hooded or misshapen by growth. Its long arms hung limply, extending past its hips. A thick swallow lodged in my throat. Raising my flashlight, I thumbed it on, directing the beam toward the fence. The creature moved with startling velocity, a blur sliding behind the nearest tree trunk. A slick, greenish limb vanished into the shadows. My throat constricted. 2 steps forward, sweeping the flashlight beam frantically. Nothing. My skin felt feverish, despite the chill air, the frantic drumming of my heart echoing in my ears. I retreated backward into the house, slammed the bolt home, and stood pressed against the hallway wall, eyes stinging from refusal to blink. Minutes passed in strained silence. Finally returning to bed, sleep was impossible. I lay atop the covers, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling until just as exhaustion threatened, the distant howl returned, sharp enough to make my stomach clench. Daylight emboldened me. An investigation of the forest seemed imperative, safer, under the sun's gaze. Clad in sturdy boots, gripping a long branch as a makeshift staff, I entered the cool, dim world beneath the canopy. The scent of damp earth that filled my nostrils. I moved with deliberate slowness, pausing frequently, listening. Birdsong punctuated the quiet. Branches sighed in the breeze. Nothing seemed amiss until, 20 minutes in, I stumbled upon a swathe of flattened vegetation, a clear path forged by something large and recent. The tracks plunged deeper into the woods. I followed, heart thudding a nervous rhythm, navigating moss-slicked logs and dense ferns. The trail culminated in a small, muddy clearing. There they were again, footprints mirroring those by the lake, larger than any human foot, unsettlingly oval, spaced for enormous strides. The fetid odor of decay and pond scum hung heavy in the still air. My nose wrinkled. Bending, I pressed my hand into one impression. The mud remained cool and damp beneath the surface. Recent. My pulse surged. Straightening, I scanned the silent clearing. No wind stirred, no birds called, an unnerving stillness descended. My scalp prickled. Slowly, carefully, I backed away, retreating from the clearing, abandoning the trail. Encountering that thing here, utterly alone, was a prospect I couldn't face. Evenings now unfolded under siege, blinds drawn tight, lights blazing. Each night brought its disquieting symphony, the snap of unseen footfalls, the eerie howl, the intermittent circling clicks. A persistent tightness gripped my chest, focus fragmenting under the weight of accumulating fear. I phoned a friend, seeking connection, but offered only a diluted version of events. Strange noises, nothing more. Raccoons, he suggested, maybe deer. I didn't argue. The truth felt too monstrous, too unbelievable to voice. One night, around 10, restlessness propelled me outside. A quick perimeter check before attempting sleep, a futile bid for reassurance. Flashlight in one hand, phone clutched in the other, I stepped onto the porch. The familiar yellow circle of the porch light illuminated the immediate grass. Beyond lay profound darkness. I started toward the lake, steps measured, silent on the damp ground. Cold air plumed with my breath. Halfway to the shore, a low clicking emanated from the trees to my left. My muscles locked. My stomach plummeted. I swung the flashlight beam in that direction. A tall shape darted behind a massive tree trunk, the light catching a fleeting glint of wet, greenish texture. Blood roared in my ears. Slowly, deliberately, I backed away, flashlight beam cutting a defensive arc before me, refusing to turn my back. The clicking intensified, seeming to echo to surround me. My jaw clenched tight. Step by measured backward step, I regained the porch. Inside, the door bolted. My hands shook violently. Breath came in ragged gasps, chest constricted, throat tight. A frantic circuit of a house, rechecking every lock, confirmed my prison's integrity. Then I sat rigid in a living room's glare, flashlight a white-knuckled anchor. My limbs felt watery, twitching at every gust of wind rattling the walls. Sleep was a forgotten country. I remained awake, vigilant, listening until dawn. The motion lights cycled on and off periodically, but I no longer possessed the courage to investigate. Now, every dusk triggers a Pavlovian response, muscles tensing, a cold sweat breaking out, my mind consumed by the potential reappearance of that shape. No direct confrontation has occurred, yet the sensation of being watched, studied, like prey assessed by a predator, is constant, visceral. Walking through my own home induces a chilling drop in my stomach. My phone is perpetually in hand, a lifeline to a help I can't articulate. How to explain? A tall, moss-covered creature is circling my property. The words sound ludicrous, even to me. Departure beckons, a desperate flight from this lakeside nightmare. Yet an opposing force anchors me, a need to understand, to confront the source of this terror before I can truly leave. Each night intensifies the struggle. Sleep comes fitfully under the combined glare of the bedside lamp, a floor lamp, and the hallway light spilling into the room. Darkness itself feels predatory. Light offers scant protection, but it's a shield against immediate surprise. Daily, I scout the property's edge for tracks. Most days, they are there, near the fence, in patches of soft earth or mud. I follow them to the forest line where they inevitably vanish. Sometimes, long vertical scratches mar the bark of trees, as if clawed fingers have dragged down the wood. Touching these grooves, feeling their depth, accelerates my heartbeat, my breath catching. I scan the surrounding trees, half expecting the figure to materialize behind me. Fleeting movements dance at the edge of my sight, dissolving when I turn. Denial is no longer an option. The evidence is tangible, the fear of physical presence constricting my throat each night. Its motives remain opaque, its nature unfathomable. How does one repel such a thing? All I have are locks, lights, and the agonizing wait for sunrise. Yet a gnawing certainty grows. It's closing in. Time is running out. Every evening, peering through the window, I brace for the night it finally crosses the threshold. From the woods to the yard, from the yard to the porch, perhaps testing the door itself. The thought lands like a physical blow, bringing me to the precipice of panic. Tonight, I sit in the living room, lights blazing, committing this to paper as an act of mooring myself to sanity. Outside, the wind rises, rattling the eaves. The motion sensor flickers intermittently. My gaze darts between the windows. My mouth is parched. Swallowing feels difficult. My fingertips are icy. I am waiting, listening, for the shape I know is out there, perhaps concealed behind the ancient oak, perhaps crouched beneath the deck, attuned to my every rustle, my every breath. I dread the next time necessity forces me outside after dark, because I feel it deep in my bones. It will be waiting, and I don't know how much longer I can endure this vigil. The dead hours held the house captive, perhaps 2, perhaps closer to 3 in the morning. Silence reigned save for the hum of my work. My small study, carved from a spare room, blazed with light. I despise the gloom when concentrating, illuminating the laptop's glow and the archipelago of documents adrift on the desk. My back, resolutely turned, faced the window. Its blinds remained undrawn, a usual oversight given the sheer void outside. No neighborly lamps pierced the thicket of shrubs and fence line bordering the property. Just impenetrable darkness. Yet, inertia had tipped me back in my chair, a momentary reprieve, and my gaze drifted to the window pane. My own tired reflection stared back, shadowed by the room's bright interior, and behind my mirrored image, another. Something humanoid, stark against the familiar backdrop of my study. A cold clamp seized my chest. A frantic drumbeat commenced against my ribs. I spun around, chair scraping harshly against the floor. Emptiness greeted me. Only the mundane geography of the room remained. My eyes darted to the vacant chair pushed against the far wall, just wood and fabric, to the stacked boxes slumbering in the corner, undisturbed cardboard. Under the desk, behind the solid plane of the closed door, fruitless, nonsensical searches. Nothing. Then, compelled, I looked back at the window. It persisted. There, in the glass, directly behind my spectral self, stood the figure, a silhouette etched in shadow, perfectly still, faceless, featureless, a dark human contour looming perhaps a hand's breadth taller than my own reflection. I stared, transfixed, straining to resolve detail where none existed. No hint of attire, no texture of hair, simply the unmistakable architecture of a body. Shoulders squared, head erect, poised. It possessed a solidity, an unnerving presence distinct from random patterns of light or shadow. My own reflection was sharp, undeniable. The desk, the chair, the papers, and behind it all, this silent sentinel. Yet the physical space it occupied remained vacant to my direct gaze. A tremor ran through me. My throat felt like parchment. Rising, I approached the window, confronting it directly. I tried aligning myself precisely with my reflection. The shadowed form in the glass held its ground, unmoving, occupying the space just behind where I'd been seated. My palm met the cool, smooth surface of the glass. Was something adhered to the exterior? A trick of the night? Peering out yielded nothing but the familiar blackness. Back to the reflection, the figure remained. A knot tightened in my sternum. Breathe, I commanded myself. breathe. Logic must prevail. Slowly, deliberately this time, I pivoted, scanning every inch of the room. The quiet was profound, punctuated only by the faint whirring of the laptop's fan and the almost subliminal buzz from a desk lamp's bulb. Elsewhere, the house slept soundly. No crevice, no corner could conceal a full-grown person. The heavy wooden door stood firmly closed. No closets offered refuge. Just the desk, the chair, the boxes. I laid a hand on the cardboard stacks, solid, unmoved. I ran my fingers along the wall, feeling utterly foolish. Of course, no one was here. Stepping back, my eyes found the window again. The tableau was unchanged. My reflection, the familiar room mirrored within it, and the interloper stand as sentinel behind me. I raised a hand, waved it tentatively. My reflection mimicked the gesture faithfully. The figure did not stir, not a twitch, not a flicker. I sidestepped left then right, testing its position. It remained steadfastly behind me in the reflection, shifting only to maintain its relative placement, slightly offset, as if watching, yet possessing no discernible eyes. An idea sparked. Extinguish the light. See what the darkness revealed. My fingers found the wall switch, flicked it down. The room plunged into near blackness, save for the laptop screen's ghostly luminescence. As my vision adjusted, a faint glimmer of the reflection remained visible, and within it, darker still against the dimness, the shape endured. Heart sinking, stomach churning. I threw the switch again, flooding the room with unwelcome light. Minutes stretched, measured by the frantic pulse in my wrists. What now? Capture it? My phone felt heavy in my hand. I unlocked it, aimed the camera towards the window, focusing on the glass. Snap, snap. I reviewed the images, my reflection, stark and clear. The window frame, the room behind me. But no figure. It refused photographic capture. More attempts, different angles, yielded the same result. Invisible to the lens, yet undeniably present to my own two eyes each time I looked at the pane. My palms grew slick. I wiped them uselessly on my trousers. My breathing hitched, shallow now, drawn through a dry mouth. Stay calm, stay rational. Perhaps distance would help. I pulled open the study door, stepped into the shadowed hallway, leaving the lights burning within the room. Glancing back, I saw the ordinary space, desk, chair, window at the far end, and faintly, even from this distance, the reflection in the glass. The figure stood patiently behind the spot where I would be sitting. Down the corridor, into the living room, more lights flickered on, banishing shadows. I paced, thoughts racing in circles. Calling the authorities felt absurd. Report a malicious reflection? They'd assume intoxication, delusion. But I was sober, merely weary from work. In the kitchen, I poured water, drank deeply, splashed cold liquid onto my face. The shock momentarily cleared my head. Returning to the hallway's threshold, I peered back into the study. It was still there. A new strategy formed. I slipped out the front door into the chill night air, circling around the house's flank towards the offending window. The ground was firm and dry beneath my feet. No footprints, no disturbance near the shrubs. Close up, peering in from the outside, I saw only my familiar office, chair, desk, boxes, no phantom presence within the room itself, nothing amiss. A light tap on the glass from the exterior produced no reaction. The yard lay empty, the fence line undisturbed. A distant engine murmured on the main road, then silence returned. Back inside, the deadbolt clicked shut behind me. The unease intensified, bordering on dread. No explanation surfaced. Back in the study, confronting the window once more, the reflection held its silent occupant. I experimented, moving around the room. Near the desk, it appeared behind me. Close to the window, still there, it seemed anchored to a fixed point, yet paradoxically, it always maintained its position relative to me's as I moved. Standing far left, then far right, the figure shifted in the reflection, perpetually shadowing my mirrored form from the same angle. It never initiated movement, no gesture, no inclination of its shadowed head. A static effigy. The fine hairs on my arms prickled, my stomach clenched. A dull ache began to throb behind my eyes. What was this? I racked my brain. An external object casting an odd shadow? Some bizarre interplay of light sources? Impossible. Nothing outside but darkness and foliage. No lights positioned to create such a specific humanoid shape. Reaching out, I touched the glass again, fingertips tracing its cold surface, seeking flaws, imperfections, smooth, unblemished. I slowed my breathing, fighting rising panic. I studied my own reflected face, eyes, nose, mouth, the familiar lines, my shoulders, my shirt. All accurate, a perfect mirror image, but for the persistent anomaly appended to it. That shape corresponded to nothing tangible in the room, visible only within the glass. Enough. I yanked the cord, letting the blinds cascade down, obscuring the window entirely. A stark white barrier replaced the reflective pane. Relief washed over me, thin and fleeting. If I raised them again, I waited, breathing deliberately in the sudden contained quiet. Go to bed, leave it be. But the gnawing uncertainty wouldn't allow it. I had to know. Tentatively, I lifted the bottom slat. My reflection leaped back into existence, and behind it, unmoved, unwavering, the figure remained, waiting. My hands trembled. I sank back into my chair, facing the covered window, yet seeing the image burned behind my eyelids. A foolish impulse seized me. "Hello?" I whispered, the sound swallowed by the small room. Silence answered. No response from the figure, no shift in the room's low hum, just the laptop fan, the electric current's faint song. I blanked the laptop screen, reducing the ambient light. The reflection dimmed slightly, the figure within it still discernible. I switched off the desk lamp. Only the overhead light now illuminated the space. Still there, all lights off in the room, relying on the hallway's spill. Darker now, a silhouette within a silhouette, but undeniably present. A strange tension gripped me, a push-pull between the urge to flee the house and an intense, morbid curiosity. Understanding felt paramount, yet utterly elusive. Another test. I retrieved a sheet of paper, held it up behind my back while watching the reflection. Would it obscure part of the figure? My mirrored self held the paper aloft. The figure remained whole, seemingly positioned behind the paper, within the reflection, unaffected by the physical object. I stepped closer, pressing myself almost against a window until my reflection dominated the glass. Impossibly, the figure condensed, shifted, ensuring it remained visible just behind my shoulder. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I swiped at it with my sleeve. My breathing grew shallow again. Control, slow down. I pulled the blinds down firmly, left them down, no more looking. I backed away, killed the light, exited the room. But standing in the hallway's relative safety, the need to verify gnawed at me. Back I went, lifting a corner of the blind just enough to peek. It was there, still there. The blind fell back into place with a soft clatter. My throat constricted. My phone again, a friend's number. It rang, unanswered in the deep night. No message left. What could I possibly articulate? The police? A phantom in the glass? Preposterous? I wasn't hallucinating. My senses felt sharp, grounded, except for the single persistent impossibility tied to that window. From the kitchen, I fetched a small flashlight. Back in the darkened study, I played its beam across the covered window, then lifted the blinds again, shining the light directly onto the glass. Different angles, sweeping motions. The figure in the reflection remained utterly unchanged, independent of my directed beam. The light revealed only dust motes, faint smudges, nothing capable of projecting such an image. Finality. I needed to block it completely. I tore a large panel of cardboard from a packing box, found tape, and secured it firmly over the inside of the window frame. Now only opaque brown faced me, no reflection possible. I stood before it, half expecting the cardboard itself to betray a shape, but it remained inert. A light tap, a soft knock, silence, just my own ragged breathing, a faint ringing in my ears. After several minutes, a measure of calm returned. Out of sight, out of mind, perhaps. I switched off the light, left the study, locking the door, a nonsensical reflex. In the living room, I collapsed onto the couch. Trying to think of anything else proved futile. Every time my eyes closed, the dark shape materialized behind my lids, motionless, silent, just there. Why? Had anything preceded this? Any subtle oddity I dismissed? No. The evening had been utterly mundane until that backward glance. Sleep here, on the couch? Exhaustion warred with adrenaline. My mind wouldn't quiet. That figure. It hadn't threatened, hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, just watched from its impossible vantage point. Would daylight banish it, or would it greet the dawn? Restless, I rose, padded back to the study door, pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. I turned the knob, pushed the door open, flicked on the light. The cardboard shield remained taped securely over the window. Hesitation prickled my skin. Then slowly, deliberately, I peeled back the tape, lowered the cardboard panel. The glass reflected the room, reflected me, and behind my image, steadfast and silent, the figure stood, unchanged. A shaky sigh escaped me. It hadn't left. It wasn't leaving. It just waited. Sweat traced a cold path down my spine. My eyes felt raw, dry from hours of strained observation. I lowered the blinds once more, replaced the cardboard barrier. I exited the room, closed the door firmly. No more checks tonight, morning. I would wait for morning, see what revelations, or lack thereof, it brought. In the living room, the television offered low, murmuring companionship. I sat on the couch, listening to the manufactured sounds, trying to anchor myself. The tightness in my chest persisted. My foot tapped a restless rhythm against the floor. Another glass of water, sipped slowly in the relative sanctuary of the kitchen, windowless on this side. Leaning against the counter, I felt my pulse gradually steady, though my thoughts continued their frantic orbit. Nearly 3, the digital clock glowed accusingly. The office would remain sealed for the remainder of the night. I dimmed the house lights further, leaving only a single lamp casting soft shadows in the living room. Stretching out on the couch, phone clutched nearby like a talisman, I resigned myself to waiting. Sleep felt distant, impossible. I lay listening to the house's quiet breaths, acutely aware that behind a closed door, shielded by blinds and cardboard, a window held a reflection that defied explanation. An inexplicable presence, locked in the glass, waiting. I could only wait with it. The wipers carved frantic, inadequate arcs across the glass, the deluge outside a roaring, gray oblivion. Through the smear, I strained to discern the road's edge, the faint promise of refuge, and then, materializing from the tempest's heart, a solitary shape, thumb angled hopefully skyward. In that sodden instant, I made a deviation from the path, a choice whose tendrils would coil around the architecture of my future. I braked, the tires hissing on the wet asphalt. My name is Ilara. What follows is the anatomy of a kindness curdled, a descent into a sleepless dread born on a night drenched in rain. Fatigue was a lead weight behind my eyes. The conference 3 states traversed had bled into this marathon drive home. Progress stalled to a crawl under the heavens' assault. Weariness warred with frustration, the yearning for my own sheets a palpable ache. Seeing him there, drenched and isolated, pricked at some vestigial node of compassion. A truly wretched night to be stranded. Easing the sedan onto the shoulder, a frantic drummer took up residence behind my ribs. He unfolded himself from the roadside gloom, gaunt beneath the downpour, hair like sodden kelp clinging to his brow. As the passenger door swung open, a peculiar scent invaded the car's dry sanctuary, an olfactory dissonance, damp wool overlaid with an acrid tang, like ozone before a lightning strike. Obliged for to stop, he murmured, offering a brief muscular spasm that left his gaze undisturbed, glacial. Thought I might take root out here. No trouble, I managed, striving for a calm I didn't possess. Where are you bound? Destination indeterminate, he replied, a study in vagueness. Further on, I'll signal the spot. Pulling back onto the slick highway, my gaze flickered towards this unexpected passenger. Younger than my initial impression, perhaps late 20s, his clothes threadbare yet paradoxically neat. An unnerving focus radiated from him, a coiled stillness that set my teeth on edge. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the wiper's hypnotic sweep and the rain's relentless drumming on the roof. Then his voice, low and unnervingly resonant, sliced through the quiet. "So, Ilara, the conference proceedings stimulating?" The car fishtailed slightly as my grip spasmed on the wheel. "My name, the conference. How could you possibly know?" A dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across pavement, escaped him. It wasn't quite a laugh. "Oh, the threads of your life are quite visible, Ilara. The little house on Sycamore, number 1542. Jasper, the golden shadow at your heels. In these conferences, such predictable orbits. You really ought to exercise more caution, inviting the unknown across your threshold on nights like this." My thoughts scattered like startled birds. How? This man was a cipher, unseen before this moment. Or had he been? "Who are you?" The demand trembled on my lips. He pivoted in the seat, fixing me with a look that turned my marrow to ice water. A predatory gleam, ancient and hungry. Recognition fails you, Ilara. It wounds me. We've crossed paths numerous times, truth be told. Your awareness simply lagged. Flickering impressions assaulted me. His silhouette framed in a cafe window weeks ago, a figure lingering near my office building just last Tuesday, a man watching Jasper chase squirrels in the park, ephemeral sightings I dismissed as tricks of light, now coalescing into a horrifying pattern. What is it you want? I fought to keep the tremor from my voice. Want is irrelevant, Ilara. Consider, rather, your desires, buried in those subterranean chambers of the self you pretend don't exist. The ennui is palpable, isn't it? The suffocating safety of your routine. That's the real reason the break's engaged tonight, isn't it? A subconscious yearning for the unexpected, for a disruption of the mundane. His words struck a disquietingly accurate chord. A restlessness had been stirring within me, a dissatisfaction with the predictable cadence of my days. But this was derangement. You're mistaken, I asserted, with more force than conviction. I stopped because of the rain. Simple pity, nothing more. That dry rustle again, amplified in the enclosed space. Ah, Ilara, ever the altruist, ever polishing the veneer of righteousness. But the foundations beneath tell a different story, don't they? My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I need you to exit my vehicle immediately. An impossibility, I'm afraid, he stated, his tone acquiring a razor's edge. Our transaction isn't concluded, far from it. Panic surged, hot and metallic. Escape. I had to find an exit. Lights. People. My foot pressed down, the engine whining in protest as I scanned the impenetrable darkness for any sign of civilization. "Futile, Ilara," he said, his calm more terrifying than any shout. "There are no convenient off-ramps here, just the road, the rain, and us." He was right. The highway unfurled before us, an endless black ribbon devoid of solace. A chilling realization dawned. I had no idea where we were, how long we'd been traveling this lost stretch. Time felt distorted, stretched thin. What have you done? The question was a barely audible breath. Nothing you didn't implicitly permit, he countered. You unlocked the door, Ilara. You extended the invitation. As if on cue, the engine coughed, a terminal rattle, and then silence descended, absolute save for the storm's percussion. We drifted to a halt on the desolate shoulder. I twisted the key. The ignition offered only a dead click. Impeccable timing, the man observed, that unsettling smile flickering once more. Perhaps we should continue our discourse under the open sky. I'm staying right here, I declared, injecting false bravado into the words. He sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. Ilara, must you resist the inevitable? Choice was never truly part of this equation, not for you. His hand reached across the console. I flinched, scrabbling for the door lock, the handle, inert, immovable, trapped. Don't struggle, he advised softly. Yielding makes the transition smoother. His fingers closed around my forearm, and a profound disorientation washed through me. The world outside warped, colors bleeding, edges blurring. His voice seemed to echo from a vast distance as my consciousness frayed. This is merely the threshold, Ilara. Step through. Your perception is adjustable. Enjoy the journey. I surfaced in my own bed, a shard of morning light piercing the bedroom dimness. Disorientation clung like mist. A dream? A stress-induced phantasm? Then my eyes fell upon a nightstand. My heart seized. A small square of paper rested there, inscribed in unfamiliar, sharp handwriting. Our journey continues soon. In the ensuing weeks, I waged war against my own sanity, attempting to rationalize the experience as a hallucination born of exhaustion. Yet the conviction lingered. Something fundamental had shifted. He exists now in the periphery, a flicker in reflective surfaces, a shadow stretching too long in the afternoon sun. Turn to confront him, and there's only empty air. Locks were changed, cameras installed, a new apartment secured, futile gestures. He remained, an invisible presence, watching, waiting, and the most insidious poison, a treacherous sliver of my soul thrills to it. The uncertainty, the constant vigilance, an electric current jolting me from slumber. As I commit these words to paper, the line between reality and delusion wavers. Am I fracturing from within? Or did I, on that rain-lashed highway, truly welcome something spectral and predatory into the fabric of my life? Certainty eludes me. Every stranger's glance feels weighted. Every secured door seems permeable to his influence. Consider this, then, a cautionary testament. Should you find yourself driving through darkness and storm and spy a figure seeking passage by the roadside, grip your wheel tighter. Keep driving, for you cannot fathom what entity you might be ushering across your threshold. And some guests, once invited in, never truly depart. The inaugural night within our newfound apartment walls brought the disquieting punctuation of footfalls from the attic. Initially, I waved it away. The groans of an old structure settling its bones, perhaps, or maybe some errant nocturnal creature claiming squatters' rights. But as days bled into nights, the sounds shed their ambiguity, sharpening into something undeniably human. It was then the realization dawned. Our sanctuary, the haven we'd sought, harbored a darkness far exceeding any simple haunting. I am Clara, a 32-year-old weaver of digital images, a graphic designer by trade. My husband, Leo, navigates the intricate landscapes of software engineering. Years we'd scrimped, hoarding pennies against the dream of escaping our constricting shoebox of a studio. Finding this airy expanse, 2 bedrooms nestled within the ornate embrace of a grand Victorian dame, felt like stumbling upon buried treasure. The rent, an anomaly of affordability. The landlord is Mr. Abernathy, an avuncular presence residing directly beneath us, radiating gentle reassurance. That first week unfolded in a haze of domestic bliss. We luxuriated in the sheer volume of space, the soaring ceilings that seemed to hold centuries of whispers, the intricate, time-worn details whispering of bygone eras. Then, the intrusions began. Faint at first, a scritching susurrus kissing the edge of sleep. Vermin likely, Leo murmured, already planning an arsenal of traps. Yet the sounds amplified, gained intention. The distinct cadence of footfalls pacing unseen boards, the protracted groan of arched timbers under weight, even susurrations like strained, muffled dialogue. Could it be echoes? I ventured, the words tasting false even as I spoke them. Sound carrying strangely from the neighbors? Our neighbors, however, were a quiet constellation, a young couple to one side, a solitary elderly woman to the other. Neither seemed the type for nocturnal promenades at 3 in the morning. One night, perhaps a fortnight after settling in, I surfaced from sleep to find the space beside me cold. Disoriented, adrift in the pre-dawn gloom, I padded into the living room. Leo stood sentinel, a solitary figure aiming a spear of flashlight beam towards the ceiling. Did you hear it? His whisper was a taut thread in the stillness, his face stark alabaster in the reflected light. Before I could frame a question, the sound answered for him, a long, agonizing creak, the unmistakable sound of someone traversing the floor directly overhead. But no floor existed there, only the attic, a space Mr. Abernathy had designated purely for storage, explicitly forbidden to tenants. The following day found us questioning Mr. Abernathy. His reaction was discordant. A laugh erupted, too loud, too brittle, dismissing our concerns as the typical complaints of settling into an old house. Yet his eyes, they wouldn't meet ours directly, skittering nervously, and a subtle tremor agitated his hands as he offered hollow reassurances. We might have forced ourselves to accept his explanation had the phenomena remained purely auditory, but then objects began their silent migrations. Keys vanished from their designated hook, only to reappear elsewhere. Books shifted on their shelves, forming new, unfamiliar alignments. One afternoon, I returned home to the chilling tableau of every framed photograph meticulously turned to face the wall. It was Leo who suggested deploying a silent witness, a camera, to capture the truth of these disturbances. The captured footage sent tendrils of ice through my veins. At precisely 2:17 a.m., The square outline of the attic hatch set into our hallway ceiling began to move, easing open with excruciating slowness. A hand emerged, pale, unnervingly thin, followed by an arm draped in the frayed ruin of a sleeve. The camera's vantage point concealed the rest, but the microphone picked up the soft, deliberate tread of footsteps moving through our home. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, we confronted Mr. Abernathy. His carefully constructed facade disintegrated. There's an explanation, he stammered, his composure shattering as he ushered us into the confines of his own apartment below. The story he unspooled defied all logic, all reason. Years prior, his son, Julian, had become entangled with a corrosive element, a vortex of narcotics and petty criminality, a downward spiral, relentless and seemingly irreversible. When Julian faced accusations for a transgression grave enough to erase his future behind bars, Mr. Abernathy had made a choice born of desperation. He had secreted his son away in the attic, carving out a hidden refuge where Julian could vanish from the world's gaze. It was meant to be temporary, Mr. Abernathy choked out, his voice fracturing under the weight of years. Just until we could prove his innocence. But the evidence, it was insurmountable. And Julian, the confinement, it changed him. A wave of nausea washed over me. How long? The question felt thick, heavy on my tongue. How long has he been up there? Mr. Abernathy's reply landed like a physical blow, chilling the marrow in my bones. 15 years. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. 15 years. A man entombed above us, his sanity eroding under the relentless pressure of isolation. It illuminated everything, the spectral noises, the displaced objects. Julian slipping down into our lives during the veil of sleep or absence, driven perhaps by hunger or maybe a more profound starvation for simple human connection. Logic screamed for the authorities, yet Mr. Abernathy dissolved before us, pleading for comprehension, for a sliver of time to untangle the impossible knot he had tied. Against the clamor of our better judgment, we conceded a few days. Those days stretched into an eternity of hypervigilance. Each creak of the old house became a potential footfall, every shadow a lurking presence. Sleep became a fractured, guarded affair, taken in shifts. Yet no amount of preparedness could have braced us for the third night. I was in the kitchen, the mundane act of filling a glass suddenly shattered by Leo's cry. I flew to the living room. He was locked in a desperate struggle with a figure gaunt and spectral, eyes burning with a wild, untamed light, Julian. In the frantic tangle of limbs, his gaze snagged on mine, and in their depths, I glimpsed an abyss of tormented years, of sanity frayed beyond repair. I only wanted to talk, Julian rasped, his voice a dry husk, roughened by profound disuse. It's so lonely up there. Leo wrenched himself free, positioning himself as a shield between Julian and me. You need help, he stated, striving for a calm he couldn't possibly feel. Let us help you find it. For a fleeting, fragile moment, a flicker of understanding seemed to touch Julian's haunted features. But then, the sound of hurried footsteps ascending the stairs. Mr. Abernathy, alerted by the commotion. Raw panic flared in Julian's eyes. He lunged not towards us, but towards the window, forcing it open with desperate strength before either of us could react. "No!" Mr. Abernathy's anguished cry echoed from the stairwell a moment too late. Julian was already through the opening, a frantic silhouette scrambling down the iron rungs of the fire escape into the concealing darkness. The ensuing hours dissolved into a maelstrom of flashing lights and official voices. Police saturated the building. Mr. Abernathy, enveloped in shuddering sobs, was taken into custody. Julian, swallowed by the city's nocturnal labyrinth, remained elusive. As we recounted the impossible events, a turbulent cocktail of fear, pity, and anger churned within me. Mr. Abernathy's actions were indefensible, yet etched in his despair was the tragic figure of a father whose love had warped into a destructive, misguided shield. The attic, once breached by the authorities, presented a tableau of profound desolation. A rudimentary living space had been eked out. A cot, a scattering of books, a few meager personal effects. But the walls bore the true testament, frantic script and disturbing sketches clawed across the plaster, mapping the geography of a mind unraveling over 15 solitary years. In the days that followed, our building transformed into a morbid spectacle. Reporters staked out the perimeter, hungry for any scrap of information about the attic man, as the headlines swiftly christened Julian. Remaining there was unthinkable, the very air thick with the residue of suffering, the ceiling a constant reminder of the hidden tragedy. We severed the lease, retreating across town to a new, anonymous space. But the experience etched itself deep. For months, I'd bolt upright in the dead of night, heart hammering, convinced I'd heard that phantom tread overhead. Leo, ever the pragmatist, fortified our new home with layers of electronic vigilance. We both sought counsel, attempting to unpack the trauma piece by painstaking piece. Julian was never apprehended. Sometimes my thoughts drift to him. Where did he flee? How does a man reintegrate into a world that continued its relentless march without him? A part of me whispers a hope for his peace, for the intervention he so clearly needed. Another part remains forever scanning windows, alleyways, fearing the sudden reappearance of that gaunt face, those haunted eyes. Mr. Abernathy received his sentence, prison time for false imprisonment, for obstructing the course of justice. I attended the final hearing, not fueled by vengeance, but by a desperate need for closure. As they led him away, his gaze met mine across the courtroom. In that brief, heavy moment, I saw not a felon, but simply a broken old man, stripped bare, having sacrificed everything in a devastatingly flawed attempt to salvage his son. 2 years have unspooled since the nightmare discovery in the attic. Leo and I, we are healing. Tentative conversations about starting a family, a dream deferred by the darkness, have begun to surface. Yet the lesson learned within those Victorian walls remains indelible. Sometimes The most potent horrors aren't born of spectral entities or masked assailants. They fester in the secrets we hoard, the desperate bargains we strike, and the unforeseen cascading consequences. Sometimes, the truest terror isn't the bump in the night, but the silent, devastating tragedy of a life unlived, sequestered in the shadows just above our heads. Every so often, when stillness blankets the house and the evening shadows lengthen unnaturally, my gaze drifts upwards towards the ceiling. I listen, and in that quiet space, I offer a silent prayer for Julian, for Mr. Abernathy, and for all the hidden agonies concealed within the unlit corners of our lives. The neon calligraphy of Horizon Gas and Go sputtered fitfully against the vast Nevada dark, its promise of 24-hour service casting a sickly luminescence over the deserted asphalt. 2 hours past midnight. Behind the counter, I nursed a lukewarm coffee, the silence thick enough to taste, wondering if the highway would deliver anything more than tumbleweeds before dawn. Tonight, like countless others, bled into the quiet hum of the coolers, unaware that survival would soon become the only currency that mattered. They call me Leo. 23 orbits around the sun, a detour from college leading me here to this anchorite existence managing the night shift. It wasn't ambition, just necessity, a paycheck, a roof, and endless empty hours perfect for devouring paperbacks or wrestling with the screenplay perpetually stuck on page 17. The shift began predictably. 10 p.m. saw Sal, the evening guy, shuffle out, leaving behind the usual litany of minor complaints: slow business, the perpetually cantankerous coffee machine. She's being moody again, he'd warned, clapping my shoulder. Wonderful. Another battle against caffeine withdrawal loomed. Time stretched thin, coolers restocked, floors swabbed clean, the coffee machine coaxed into yielding a grudgingly decent brew. Around 1, the growl of a diesel rig broke the monotony. Its driver, weary-eyed and smelling of stale road, bought fuel and coffee, muttering about the miles yet to devour. A brief island of human contact in an ocean of quiet. I nodded, offered a tired smile, grateful for the interruption. Then, just after the clock ticked past 2, the night's character shifted. Engrossed in Kerouac's restless prose, I was pulled back by the low rumble of multiple engines. Not 1, but 3 vehicles ghosted into the lot. A dented old Chevrolet, a van that looked like it had lost several arguments with solid objects, and incongruously, a polished black SUV gleaming under the neon's frail light. 6 figures emerged, silhouettes against the glow, all men, a disparate collection spanning decades, some rough-hewn, others possessing a veneer of respectability, shattered by the predatory intensity in their gaze. The chime above the door announced their arrival, and the air inside instantly grew heavy, charged with unspoken static, like the moments preceding a lightning strike. They didn't browse, they dispersed, moving through the narrow aisles with a disquieting, coordinated purpose. My skin prickled. The eldest, tall with hair like scattered salt and pepper, approached the counter. His smile was a thin, bloodless curve. Bathroom key? I nodded, my hand reaching automatically for the plastic tags dangling from its hook. Turning back, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. The others had taken positions, one near the entrance, another casually leaning near the convex security mirror. My pulse hammered against my ribs. "Here you go," I managed, striving for nonchalance, extending the key. He accepted it, but remained rooted, leaning forward conspiratorially, his voice a low rasp. "All right, son, listen close. Pop the till, everything inside. Then you show us the safe. Play along, maybe you see the sunrise." Reality fractured. This desolate outpost? Robbery? The biggest drama usually involved a declined credit card. "Look," I heard myself stammer, the words flimsy. "There's hardly any cash. It's mostly cards now. Maybe just take." His hand shot out, fingers biting into the fabric of my shirt, yanking me forward until I could smell stale cigarettes on his breath. "This ain't a request," he snarled, the smile gone, replaced by naked menace. "The register, now." My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the lock. The drawer sprang open. One of them tossed a canvas bag onto the counter. As I numbly transferred the meager collection of bills, my mind raced, seeking an escape vector. The panic button beneath the counter felt miles away, impossible to reach undetected under their watchful eyes. "Safe," the leader commanded, the bag now heavier by maybe $200. "Where?" My feet felt leaden as I led them towards the cramped back office. Hope flickered, fragile but insistent. The safe was governed by a time lock, impregnable until morning. Would they buy it? Explaining the mechanism, I watched the leader's eyes narrow, fury sparking within their depths. He turned, conferring with his cohort in urgent, guttural whispers. Phrases drifted, "Waste of our damn time. Move to the next target." Relief washed over me, premature and foolish. Then the chilling coda. "Can't leave him." Time warped, stretching into agonizing slow motion. I saw the leader's hand dip inside his jacket. Instinct, raw and primal, surged through me. The fire extinguisher, bright red against the drab wall, became my only thought. I lunged, tearing it from its bracket, twisting the pin, squeezing the handle. A blinding cloud of chemical white erupted, filling the tiny space, choking the air. Blindly, I swung the heavy cylinder, felt it connect with solid resistance. A grunt of pain followed. No time to assess. I bolted. Bursting from the office, pursued by enraged shouts and curses, I plunged into the familiar landscape of snack aisles and beverage coolers. Knowledge gleaned from months of tedious shifts became my shield. I sent towers of chips cascading, swept shelves of candy bars crashing down, desperate obstacles in their path. The front door almost there, but a figure loomed, blocking the exit. Without a second thought, I snatched a gallon jug of blue windshield washer fluid from a display, heaved it. It flew in a clumsy arc, connecting with a sickening, wet thud. The figure crumpled. Freedom. The cool night air slapped my face as I burst onto the asphalt, the fluorescent glare suddenly harsh. Footsteps pounded behind me, echoing my own frantic rhythm. I ran towards the enveloping darkness beyond the station's feeble perimeter, aiming for the anonymous embrace of the desert scrub. My lungs burned, legs screamed, but the sound of pursuit was a relentless spur. Where was I even going? Away. Just away. Minutes later, maybe longer, time had lost all meaning. I risked a backward glance. No immediate pursuers visible, only distant, angry shouts fading on the night air. I pushed onward, stumbling over unseen rocks, thorns tearing at my jeans. The horizon gas and go was now just a faint, receding smear of light against the horizon. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind the stark terror of my predicament. Alone, miles from anywhere, hunted. Despair began its cold creep just as twin points of light appeared, growing steadily brighter on the distant highway. A vehicle. Hope surged anew. I scrambled towards the road, waving my arms like a madman. The car slowed, hesitated, then pulled over. Through the windshield, an older couple peered out, their expressions a mixture of concern and profound weariness. "Help!" I gasped, leaning against their door, the words tumbling out. "Please, robbed the station, tried to kill me, men, after me." Perhaps it was the sheer terror radiating from me, my disheveled state, but they didn't question. A door clicked open. I tumbled inside, the scent of stale air freshener and old upholstery strangely comforting. As the car accelerated back onto the highway, the woman was already dialing 911, her voice calm but urgent. The ensuing hours dissolved into a kaleidoscope of flashing lights, uniformed questions, the sterile chill of a brief hospital check. By the time law enforcement reached the gas station, the men and their strange trio of vehicles had vanished into the Nevada immensity, leaving behind only chaos and my fragmented account. In the days that followed, the raw shock subsided, replaced by the lingering tremors of what if, the chilling proximity of death. Yet beneath the fear, a curious ember of pride began to glow. I had stared into the abyss and scrambled back out. The job at Horizon Gas & Go quit naturally, but the night forged something new within me. I returned to my studies, driven by a focus previously unknown. My writing found a different vein, colored by visceral understanding of genuine peril, the surprising resilience unearthed within. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of night, phantom footsteps echo. A ghostly rush of fear tightens my chest. But then I remember, I survived. I thought faster, I ran harder, I escaped. And if I could face down armed men with nothing but wits and a fire extinguisher, perhaps finishing a degree, perhaps crafting a meaningful life, wasn't such an impossible feat after all. The fire's restless dance cast flickering shadows, yet it did little to pierce the profound quietude swallowing the forest. This was our third night immersed in the wild's embrace, but the wilderness felt wrong, hollowed out. Gone were the familiar nocturnal whispers, the cricket's thrum, the owl's soft query. In their place reigned a weighted stillness, a silence so absolute it frayed the edges of my composure. We hadn't known, couldn't have conceived, that our coveted escape was unraveling into a terror destined to etch itself into our memories. I am Elias, 28 years breathing Boston's engineered air, a life spent translating logic into code. My companions, Clara, Leo, and Maya, shared my urban existence, and together we dreamt for months of this immersion, this flight from the city's ceaseless hum into nature's promised solace. The Adirondack campsite, remote and hushed, had seemed an idyll far removed from the well-trodden paths. Our initial days unfolded like a forgotten dream. Sunlight dappled forest floors during our hikes. Lakes, crystalline and cold, offered bracing swims. Evenings found us gathered by the flames, trading tales beneath a canopy of stars, the scent of toasted sugar hanging sweet in the air. But as the third day bled into twilight, a subtle dissonance crept in, an unnamed apprehension settling upon us like mist. It began subtly. Leo, peering into the encroaching dark, spoke of fleeting shapes just beyond the firelight's reach, phantoms that dissolved under the beam of our torches. Clara's rucksack, left innocently beside her tent, materialized inexplicably high amongst the leaves, dangling from a branch 20 feet above the ground. We deflected the oddity with laughter, attributing it to absent-mindedness, perhaps minds primed for spookiness by campfire lore. Then, the impressions in the earth. On the fourth morning, emerging into the cool air, I saw them first, a deliberate trail of prints. Too vast for any man, too alien for any known beast, they inscribed a perfect circle around our small encampment, appearing from the dense woods and vanishing back into them with unsettling abruptness. "Look," I managed, my voice betraying a tremor I despised. "You need to see this." They gathered, their faces soon mirroring the disquiet churning within me. "What in God's name?" Leo breathed, kneeling, tracing the impossible contours pressed into the soil. Maya, ever the anchor to rationality, offered a theory. Local kids, maybe. A prank. They could have used molds, giant fake feet. Yet, a deeper instinct refuted her logic. These were no shallow tricks. The prints sank deep, testament to an immense weight far exceeding human capacity. And their very form, an inherent wrongness in their shape, sent a chill cascading down my spine. We argued options. A primal urge screamed to dismantle camp, to flee. But reason countered. We were a full day's trek from the cars, and plunging into unfamiliar territory, stalked by the maker of those tracks, felt like trading one peril for another. We resolved to stay, but with heightened awareness, establishing a rotating watch through the night, our senses straining against the oppressive dark, listening for any tear in the silence. My turn came during the suffocating quiet preceding dawn. It was then I heard it, a low, guttural vibration that emanated not from a single point, but from the very air around us. I froze, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs, loud enough, I feared, to betray my terror. And then I saw him. Eyes, unnatural, luminous green orbs materializing from the tangled undergrowth. Not one pair, but several, a constellation of malevolent lights encircling us. My throat constricted. A warning cry died before it could form. As suddenly as they appeared, the eyes retracted, melting back into the impenetrable black. I remained rooted, trembling, until the first hesitant rays of morning painted the leaves in pale gold. Relaying the encounter, I saw skepticism war with fear in their eyes, but doubt evaporated as we emerged from our tents. Our provisions lay ravaged, containers ripped asunder, contents scattered with violent abandon. Yet it was the inscription, gouged crudely into the bark of a sentinel pine, that truly froze our blood. Get out. Debate ceased. We packed with frantic speed, shedding non-essential gear in our desperate haste to obey the start command. The hike back was an exercise in paranoia. The sensation of being observed was a physical weight. Twigs snapped just behind us. Peripheral flickers hinted at something immense shadowing our path, always veiled by the dense foliage. Hours crawled by, nerves frayed, patience evaporated. Suddenly, Clara halted, rigid. "Elias," she whispered, her voice thin. "We've been here, this place." She was right. Impossibly, despite map and compass, our panicked flight had looped us back to the violated campsite. Our discarded belongings lay scattered, but now arranged with chilling deliberation into a rough circle. At its heart rested a small, peculiar object. Leo, driven by a courage bordering on folly, stepped forward. "It's a tooth," he murmured, lifting it. Jagged, yellowed, and far larger than any tooth he'd ever conceived of. Before thought could follow observation, a roar tore through the clearing, a sound so primal and so immense it seemed to vibrate the earth itself. Trees at the forest's edge shuddered, splintering as something vast and unseen surged towards us. Instinct took over. We ran, not together, not with purpose, but in pure, unthinking terror. Branches tore at clothes and skin. The panicked gasps of the others echoed my own ragged breathing. Behind us, the crashing sounds of pursuit were terrifyingly close, gaining. Time dissolved into a green, vertiginous blur. My lungs burned, legs screamed, yet fear propelled me onward. It was Maya who spotted the refuge. "Here," she cried, scrambling into a narrow fissure between two massive boulders. We plunged after her, squeezing through the tight passage into a small, dark cavern. For a heartbeat, only our desperate panting filled the space. Then the sounds from outside began. Heavy snuffling, the scrape of claws on stone as our pursuer tested the entrance, seeking purchase, seeking entry. We huddled in the absolute dark, daring not even a flashlight beam, lest it pinpoint our fragile sanctuary. Hours bled together. The sounds outside shifted, frantic scrabbling alternating with periods of unnerving silence. As true night descended, a new horror emerged. Voices, distinctly human, calling our names. A surge of desperate hope flared, instantly extinguished by the chilling realization of their wrongness. They mimicked the voices of loved ones, parents, siblings, pleading for aid, luring us out. A trick we knew with cold certainty. "Don't answer," I hissed, grabbing Leo's arm as he instinctively moved towards a sound, mimicking his mother's desperate cry. "It's not them. It can't be." The night became a crucible of fear, confusion, and whispered prayers. When dawn finally filtered weakly into our hiding place, the forest outside had fallen silent once more. We waited, hours longer, until thirst and cramped agony forced our hand. Emerging cautiously, we found the woods transformed, returned to a semblance of peace. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, sunlight streamed through the leaves. Only our ravaged appearances and the haunted depths of each other's eyes testified that the nightmare had been real. We navigated back to civilization with unnatural speed, collapsing at the ranger station, babbling our fragmented story. The search party dispatched found nothing. No colossal footprints, no warning carved in bark, no monstrous tooth. All evidence had vanished, swallowed by the indifferent woods. Years have passed. We've sought answers in obscure texts, local folklore, even the shadowed recesses of our own minds through hypnosis. No explanation suffices. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, the memory surfaces unbidden, the guttural growl, those baleful, glowing eyes watching from the dark. I have never gone back. I never will. Whatever dwells in that wilderness made its sovereignty terrifyingly clear. We were trespassers in its domain. The four of us, once bound by friendship, are now tethered primarily by that shared trauma, drifting apart yet irrevocably linked. Occasionally, the phone rings late, a panicked call from Clara, or Leo, or Maya. Words are unnecessary. I know the dream has returned, the one where the cave wasn't found in time, where the pursuit culminated not in escape, but in capture. And as I offer hollow comfort across the wires, my gaze inevitably drifts to my own window, scanning the familiar shadows outside for a pair of luminous green eyes. The forest's exhale became a scream of buckshot, a whistle of lead parting the air inches from my temple. Silence shattered, splintering the sylvan calm, sending panicked birds exploding from the canopy. In that thunderclap instant, our pilgrimage into tranquility became a desperate scramble for existence. Months we dreamt of this escape, this immersion in the wild, far from the city's relentless hum, a quartet seeking solace. Myself, Leo, my steadfast friend, Clara, his partner, eyes full of quiet wonder, and Ben, our shared anchor to buoyant humor. We'd sought out the deep woods, a pocket of the national forest, deliberately untouched by marked trails or designated campsites, a place promising genuine isolation. The journey itself had been a symphony of anticipation, miles devoured to the beat of nostalgic anthems, punctuated by laughter and detours to roadside oddities. We watched the urban grid dissolve into undulating hills, then thicken into primordial forest. Arriving late Friday, sunlight slanting golden through the pines, we found perfection. A small clearing cradled by giants, a brook murmuring nearby. Tents rose like canvas mushrooms, firewood cracked invitingly, and the evening unfolded under a velvet sky, pinpricked with stars. Marshmallows toasted to gooey perfection, spectral tales were spun, conversations flowed late into the crisp night, accompanied by the churring orchestra of crickets and the occasional owl's query. How blessed we felt, cocooned in this untamed paradise. Saturday dawned bright, pulling us from sleep with the promise of exploration. Fueled by instant coffee and porridge, we plunged into the woods. The path, barely this, choked with undergrowth, only heightened the thrill of discovery. Hours melted away amidst hidden cascades and fleeting glimpses of wildlife. It was returning, the sun beginning its descent, that the texture of the day changed. A profound stillness descended, the air heavy, expectant. The birdsong had ceased. The breeze held its breath. "Listen," I murmured, halting. Leo glanced back, brow furrowed. "To what?" "Exactly," I replied. "The silence. It's wrong." As if summoned, a twig snapped sharply in the dense brush nearby. We spun, hearts leaping, finding only dappled shadows and layers of fallen leaves. "Just a deer, maybe," Clara offered, though her voice held a tremor. Urgency quickened our steps, the campsite suddenly a beacon of perceived safety. Yet the woods felt different now, charged. The sensation of being observed prickled the back of my neck. Every rustle, every flicker of movement in the periphery felt like a veiled threat. We burst into the clearing, braced for overturned tents or scattered supplies. Nothing, everything lay undisturbed. A collective exhale escaped us. "See?" Ben managed a shaky laugh, freaking out over nothing. The reprieve dissolved as a distant engine growled, the sound swelling, chewing gravel. Someone was navigating the overgrown logging track toward us. A scarred pickup truck, mud-caked and weary, skidded into our sanctuary, engine sputtering into silence. 3 figures emerged, broad-shouldered and bearded, clad in faded flannel and camouflage. They carried an aura of rough-hewn menace, figures torn from some bleak, forgotten ballad, and a cold certainty clenched my gut. We were profoundly unwelcome. The eldest, his face mapped with grit and a jagged scar cleaving one cheek, surveyed us. "Well now?" His voice rasped, slow and deliberate. "Looky what the woods dragged in." Leo, ever the peacemaker, stepped forward, hands raised slightly, a strained smile fixed on his face. "Evening? Just camping out here for the weekend. Hope we're not trespassing?" The man's eyes, chips of cold stone, narrowed. "Ain't your land, city boy? This here's ours. Always been." My gaze flickered to Clara, to Ben. My own fear stared back from their faces. Miles from anywhere, signal non-existent. If these men chose violence, the trees would be our only witnesses. "We're truly sorry," Clara ventured, her voice thin but clear. "We didn't realize. We can pack up and leave right now." The scarred man chewed on this, gaze drifting over our tents, our gear, us. He shook his head slowly. "Don't reckon you're going anywhere just yet. Not till we figure things out." It was then I saw them clearly, rifles slung casually over shoulders, and cradled in the leader's hands, a shotgun. The air turned glacial. Our situation had become acutely, terrifyingly clear. The hours that followed bled into a nightmarish tableau. Forced to sit by our own fire, we watched them paw through our belongings, commandeering food, draining our beers. Their words were a low current of mockery and thinly veiled threats. Leo simmered beside me, knuckles white, jaw tight. I prayed his restraint would hold. As true darkness enveloped the woods, their interactions grew fractious, voices rising in dispute. Fragments drifted over the crackling flames, talk of lessons, examples, trespassers taught proper respect. A chilling certainty settled over me. Staying meant inviting catastrophe. I met Leo's gaze across the firelight, flicking my eyes towards the impenetrable woods behind us. Understanding dawned instantly. I saw him lean close, whispering urgently to Clara and Ben. We waited, coiled springs of desperation, for an opening. It came when the youngest of the trio lurched away from the fire's glow, seeking relief in the shadows. We didn't hesitate. We exploded into motion, plunging into the black embrace of the undergrowth. Branches lashed, thorns tore as we fled. Behind us, enraged shouts erupted, followed by the sound that would echo in my dreams, the definitive, hollow boom of a shotgun. The blast tore through the leaves just overhead, a terrifying proximity. Adrenaline surged, a raw fuel propelling us deeper into the tangled dark. They were pursuing, crashing through the woods like enraged beasts, their furious cries echoing our panicked flight. Another shot cracked the night, then a third, blind firing into the blackness, hoping chance would guide their pellets. We ran until our lungs burned like acid, until our legs were trembling instruments of exhaustion. It felt like an eternity before the sounds of pursuit dwindled, then vanished into the vast indifference of the woods. Still, we pressed on, fear a relentless goad. Finally spent, we collapsed into a shallow gully, breath tearing raggedly from our chests. Silence, thick and absolute, descended, broken only by our gasping. "Now what?" Clara whispered, the sound barely disturbing the air. I looked at my friends, their faces etched with terror in the faint starlight. Lost, stripped of supplies, directionless, with armed men potentially still combing the darkness. "We keep moving," I forced out, injecting a confidence I didn't possess. "Downhill, always downhill. We'll hit something eventually. A road, a house." The night was a long traverse through fear. Every snapped twig, every rustle of unseen nocturnal life sent jolts of terror through us. Dawn found us ragged specters, dehydrated, scratched, bruised, but miraculously breathing. And then, cutting through the nascent birdsong, the most beautiful sound imaginable, the distant hum of traffic, a highway, civilization. Authorities were initially dubious, our tale sounding wild, improbable, but the campsite yielded its grim evidence: discarded beer cans, cigarette stubs, the glint of spent shotgun casings. A search was organized, but the men who had turned our Adel into inferno were never apprehended. Years have passed. The woods remain, for me, a forbidden territory. The whisper of wind through leaves, the sudden crack of a branch underfoot, These sounds transport me instantly back to that precipice of terror. We, the survivors, seldom speak of it directly, yet sometimes, in a quiet moment, I see Leo's gaze drift to the tree line, a flicker of old vigilance in his eyes, and I know the memory lives in him too. We were fortunate, we endured, but the question lingers, a cold shadow. Are they still out there, those men, their dominion the deep woods, awaiting the next unsuspecting souls to stumble into their path? I can only hope not. For my part, the concrete certainty of the city holds more appeal now. Some wildernesses, I learned with visceral finality, are best left untrodden.